Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Northwest ATTC webinar. I'm Jennifer Verbeck, and I'm your host for today. We're excited to have Christina Love and Jess Wojcik presenting for us today on Introduction to Supervision of Peer-Based Recovery Support Services. We'll go to the next slide, please. We'll just go over a couple of housekeeping things. First, if you have any questions for our presenters, please type them into the chat box at any time, and we'll try to answer some as we go along. And any that we aren't able to address during the presentation, we'll try to answer at the end. Next slide. You'll be getting an email at the end of today's webinar that has a link to a survey in it. Please make sure you're taking that survey. It helps us make sure we're bringing you the content you're most interested in, and that email will also have a link to download the slides from today and a link to our website where you'll be able to find a recording of the webinar, and that should be available later this afternoon. Next slide. Additionally, we'll be sending everyone who attends this live webinar a certificate of attendance, and it takes us about a week to get those out. You don't need to do anything to get the certificate unless you're watching this in a group. If that's the case, please have someone in the group email us within a business day with the names and email addresses for everyone who wants a certificate. And you can see our email address up there on the slide. It's northwest@attcnetwork.org. Next slide. Okay, and then I'll just do some brief introductions here. I'm pleased to introduce our speakers today, Christina Love, who is a consultant, recovery coach, and civil human rights activist. She also works as a senior specialist for the Alaska Network on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. We also have Jess Wojcik, who facilitates peer support specialist training and continuing education through Path to Prime LLC, which is an entity she created back in 2017. She has also been dedicated to Idaho's peer support field since 2014. And with that, I'll just turn it over to our presenters and they can expand on those introductions. Thank you for joining us, Christina and Jess.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Really grateful to work with ATTC. Thank you so much for having us. It's always a pleasure to work with you guys. My name is Christina Love. My pronouns are she and her. My family's originally from Wojcik Village, which is located in the Bristol Bay region here in Alaska. I was raised in the Chitna village, which is in the interior. And today I'm coming to you from the very beautiful Ak and Takuquan, known as Linket Alni of the Tlingit Nation, also known as Juneau, Alaska. So I work for the Alaska Network on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. My position focuses on intersectionality with a primary focus on trauma and substance use. And really what that means is that we can't talk about any one of these subjects without talking about all of the other subjects. I'm a person who identifies as having lived experience of a lot of adverse experiences. And so one of the ways that I talk about that is that being a survivor of trauma, childhood abuse, physical and sexual abuse, as well as an adult of trauma, the natural ways that we survive trauma are things like substance use and mental health issues. So a lot of the work is to normalize the ways that people survive. The unnormal thing is the trauma. And there's a lot of different ways that we can talk about individual, collective, community trauma that plays into that experience. Today's presentation is an introduction. It's an introduction to a longer 2-day training that we're going to dive into a little bit deeper. And here in just a moment, we're going to give you a little bit more of what you can expect over this next hour, as well as what you can expect from the next from the 2-day training. I'm going to throw it over to my wonderful colleague and teammate Jess and allow her to introduce herself.
Hello, I am excited and honored to be here with you all today. My name is Jess Wojcik. I use she, her pronouns and would like to acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of the Shoshone-Bannock people from which I'm speaking with you all today. I have been a certified peer support specialist in Idaho since 2014 and have been living with my own mental health challenges and navigating through my own recovery journey for over a couple decades at this point, and supporting the peer workforce and supervisors is really very near and dear to me after feeling for many years like the workplace just really wasn't a place where I could be my full self or have a relationship with a supervisor that felt welcoming or felt like I could be honest with. And after being fired from a job in 2012 due to the challenges that I was experiencing, feeling that maybe I shouldn't be in the workplace at all ever again. But luckily, I came to learn about peer support and came to learn that that wasn't true. And that's when I discovered peer support and was able to enter into a profession where my lived experience is what qualifies me to be in the workplace, and came to understand that it turns out everyone in the workplace really needs the same things. We all need to feel understood and accepted and valued and celebrated for what we contribute. So this has led me to just a true passion, a mission in a sense, maybe, to support behavioral health workplaces that are trauma-informed and healing-centered and strength-based, and that really allow us to embrace ourselves and staff and the communities we serve through the lens of diversity rather than disorder. And I currently facilitate peer support specialist training in continuing education through Path to Prime LLC, which is an entity that I was fortunate to start with the support of others in 2017, and that is dedicated to supporting Idaho's peer workforce and employers through training, education, and advocacy. So I am very grateful to be here with you all today, and with that, I'll hand it back over to Christina.
Yeah, so I love it. You guys are already putting your information in the chat. So we've got a couple of different things that we're gonna ask you to share with us. Jess and I just modeled for you the type of share that we're hoping to get from you. And in the training, we will go over the importance of sharing your pronouns and the community that you're from, as well as the land that you're on, the Indigenous land, your position. And we often, Jess and I will start with what we're grateful for. A lot of our meetings, I'm very, very, very grateful to work with Jess. I can tell you that the way that we work together is modeled in the information that we're going to give you today. So there's so much transparency and so much love and passion that goes into this information. So please share with us. I'm very grateful to work with Jess, but we want to hear what you're grateful for. I'm going to give it back to Jess to talk about land acknowledgements.
Yeah, so in the midst of sharing your name, pronouns, the community and land that you're on, your position, your role, and maybe something you're grateful for, if you don't already know the land that you're on, this is a really neat way to find out. You can text your zip code to country code 1, area code 907-312-5085. And a bot will respond with the names of the native lands that correspond to your region. And this is a really neat tool, a number worth saving and even sharing with others, and something that I think can also be incorporated into meetings to raise awareness about the importance of land acknowledgement, which Christina will tell us a little bit more about.
Yes, acknowledgement of our lands is a really important and simple way to resist against erasure of Indigenous histories and work toward bringing the truth. And so what this next part here is, it is a land acknowledgement that is through the lens of healing-centered engagement. Throughout this entire presentation, we're going to be talking about healing-centered practices and healing-centered engagement. And so this is an Indigenous acknowledgement of both land and identity. Part of healing-centered engagement is trauma-informed. So throughout this land acknowledgement, what I'll do is acknowledge the harm that has happened, but really focus on the way that people have survived, that really focus on the whole story of who we are as Indigenous people. So this practice of acknowledging our land and identity is important for centering healing. We acknowledge the land that each of us live, learn, and thrive on are the traditional, ancestral, and unceded homelands of Indigenous and tribal nations. We acknowledge the genocide and systems of oppression that have disposed Indigenous people of their lands, and we honor and respect the diverse and beautiful people still connected to this land. We acknowledge the preservation of our languages, traditions, rituals, and cultural knowledge, and just as important, the reimagining of our lives through storytelling. We are more than the harm that has been to us. We are brilliant, joyful, strong, hilarious, kind, giving, loving, caring, connected, honorable, respectful, gracious, authentic, and thoughtful relatives. And we are so much more than all of these things. Each of our existence is important and valuable. So healing-centered engagement is the recognition of the things that have happened to us. I can tell you that as an Alaska Native person, as an Alutiiq woman, there has been no greater story than learning about the harm that has happened, but most importantly, all of the ways that we have survived that, and all of the creativity and brilliance and that we bring to our communities.
We'd also like to share a dedication for this webinar, and it's dedicated to you, to all of you who are out there tirelessly working for social change on behalf of others to bridge the gap that we have between what people need and what programs and systems and services and organizations are able and willing to provide. So our time here together really is dedicated to you. The work that we're going to be talking about today really is part of asking systems and resources and programs to meet people where they're at, rather than asking them to try to fit into the construct of predefined programming, which is what so often happens. So we appreciate you taking the time to be here today. We appreciate the work that you are doing and give you a big shout out for that. And we're curious too, just what brings you to this work, and maybe even going beyond that, what sustains you in this work? We know that this is hard work, it's emotional labor, and there's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of ourselves that we have to bring. So we're wondering what brought you to this work, what sustains you in this work, if you'd like to share that in the chat as well, because these are really the questions that we need to center in order to make decisions and provide supervision in a supportive way. If we can remain connected to these things for ourselves, it's going to directly translate into the ways that we engage the staff that we're working to support, and the culture that we're creating at our organizations. So how are you going to stay here if that is what you choose to do and be in this for the long haul? Maybe even thinking about what feeds your spirit and your heart in this work, what helps grow and inspire you, and how can you stay connected to those things when it gets a little bit tough out there?
What you'll notice from this training, and we'll expand on it more in the 2-day training, is that we will always start with self. We will ask a lot of questions, and this is really from the truth that we can't give people what we don't have. So we will ask you to do a lot of reflection and a lot of catching of your own beliefs and thoughts about narratives about who you are. Just a really quick introduction about me. So what brought me to this work is that my Alutiiq mother was experiencing homelessness and brought me back to the shelter after I was born. And it was a domestic violence and sexual assault shelter here in Alaska in Fairbanks, where they had a 30-day minimum. So we were back to being homeless after 30 days. And this felt especially hard for me later as an adult, experiencing homelessness and also violence again. In connection to that generational and historical violence, and wasn't able to access any of the services that I could. Was kicked out of shelters, wasn't able to access treatment, was often kicked out of treatment, substance use treatment for mental health needs, and I would get a lot of come back after you've addressed your mental health, or in trying to access mental health services, and it was you need to address your substance use issues, and trying to access housing and other resources. There was a lot of barriers. So I came into this work holding a lot of resentment for systems that were designed to help me that actually caused a lot more harm. So while trying to access those systems, I felt a lot of a lot of othering. I felt small, and I felt a lot of things that I didn't even have definition for, that it just hurt and it felt hard. And then that made me not want to interact. And then I also, there was a lot of misunderstood. I felt that people genuinely didn't understand the way that trauma affects and impacts behavior, and that behavior is usually linked and connected to some type of a need, as well as a lot of negative assumptions about the way that people survive. So whether that was my own internalized oppression for being an Alaska Native person experiencing homelessness and addiction, and in connection to those narratives, or some of the other ways that stigma and shame show up. What I found was that a lot of the same things that I experienced as a person in active addiction and homelessness, I received a lot of those same things in the workplace. And so that, so my experience was that even as a peer, navigating those systems or working within the systems, that a lot of the same stigma was present there. And so this presentation and this work really is about workforce development. It is making a way for more people like us who have these experiences, with the recognition that there is no us and them, that what we're talking about is for everybody. Oh, actually, Jess, do you want to say more on this one before we go to the next one?
We'll go ahead. Thanks.
Okay. But this is, actually, I'll turn it over to you to let us know how this connects to the training. We want to hear from you, even if you don't answer the question, to really meditate on, you know, what brought you here. And we will, during the training, be looking at it almost like a safety plan. You know, what are the things that really make you come alive, and then what feels hard, and how can, and what are some of the things that we can put in place as organizations, and really thinking about organizations as communities. And that they are, you know, with the place within the community and their own community. They have their own culture, their own beliefs, and their own norms and narratives. And what are the ways that we can work within that culture to transform relationships, and really focusing on those transformative relationships versus transactional relationships. But Jess is going to tell us a little bit more about what you can expect over the next hour, as well as what you can expect from the 2-day training.
Yes, and I love everything that's coming into the chat too. I love this one. A lot of lived experience brought me here, and it's made me want to make a change because trauma never leaves, but you can make a way for yourself. And I want to keep going, not only for myself, but for others. Thanks so much for all the good stuff that's being shared in the chat in terms of what brought you to this work and what's sustaining you. And what we're going to be talking about today really is deconstructing that us and them dynamic that exists in the workplace when peers are integrated, and really looking at doing that deconstruction by bringing our attention to the ways that all staff experience harm. We know that what brings many of us to this work is our own journey, and that peers are often experienced by maybe clinicians or supervisors who might not identify as having lived experience, or who do identify as having lived experience but aren't able to disclose that based on the role that they're in. So we really want to create a space where it feels like we're all in this together, and hopefully kind of impart an atmosphere here today that feels like the one that we're supporting you in creating in your organizations. And deconstructing that us and them is really at the root of that, and going to be a big focus of what we talk about here today. And we're going to do that through discussing healing-centered solutions. So solutions that are found in diverse and equitable, inclusive, accessible, culturally responsive, trauma-informed, person-centered, empowerment-focused, and strength-based care. We can't deconstruct the us and them without looking at those types of approaches in the workplace. And we're going to talk about supervisory practices too that can really influence this type of change that we're going to be talking about here today. And just a reminder here, this really is going to feel like an intro, kind of like a bird's eye view to the longer 2-day training that's going to be July 26th and 27th that we'd encourage you all to register for. So we invite you to continue to put your questions and comments in the chat. We're also going to open a poll here and kind of kick things off by asking you to think about the answers to these questions. And I think you can see that the name of this poll is completely anonymous poll. And it is indeed completely anonymous. And you might even notice what happens inside of you as you are answering these types of questions. So have you yourself experienced increased mental health concerns in the last year? Have you experienced increased substance use concerns for yourself in the last year? Are you comfortable seeking help from your employer? And are you comfortable accepting help from your employer, right? So what does that look like? What does that look like for you? And as Christina said, all of this has to start with ourselves and the way that we respond to these types of questions, because that is how it translates most supportively into the supervision that is provided. So we'll keep that poll up for a little while. You might notice the way that you feel about the questions. It's just as important as even your answers to the questions. And we're all going to be at different places in answering these questions. And you might even notice, do you trust us in answering honestly? And it's okay to even feel protective in responding to this. And it really shines a light on a bigger message that we have for you here today, is that sometimes in the workplace we don't feel like we have the room to be our full selves, or ask for help, or be honest about where we're at. And we're going to be looking a little bit more at some of the barriers and what we can do about it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jess. And so, like Jess said, we're going to go ahead and leave that poll open, and we'll give you a warning before we close it down. So this next question is about the importance of peers, and it's a multi-level question. So just for us to just reflect on what is the importance of peers in the workplace, within services and within systems. And this is something that you can put in the chat box, but it's really important, for us to really start from identifying what it is that we value about peers. Just thinking about, in the definition of this training, we really talked about the importance of vulnerability, and peers. Our identity is rooted in that vulnerability. And I think that, when I think about myself, having the opportunity to work with peers while I was navigating the criminal justice system, while I was navigating homelessness, even in active addiction, there were people who showed me how to correctly use intravenous use. That there were natural advocates, and thinking about peers in that way, just one human being helping another human being, and whatever that might look like. I think some of the important dynamics for myself when I think about peers is that there is, Melissa says, communication and trust. I think that for me it is that we are two equal people, that one person is not greater than the other person. What we're going to continually talk about and bring attention to is the imbalances of power, and how that does lead to stigma, whether we're talking about class, or we're talking about discrimination, or we're talking about racism, all of the different experiences that people have where there is a power imbalance. We're providing people with the opportunity to be in the presence of someone who believes them, for somebody who accepts them, where we are creating an atmosphere where stigma isn't present because they have gone through that themselves. And then there's a lot of peers work within the realm of a lot of principles and practices like honesty, authenticity, transparency. It's also the acknowledgement that it's hard to access services, and peers can be that bridge between silos and services and provide emotional support along the way, building wholesomeness and activity, authenticity. They have, Sean says, peers offer varying perspectives and ideas that are unique to lived experience, as well as helping to identify holes and gaps in what we're doing. Peers are representation of populations that we are trying to serve. Yes. And that's with the acknowledgement that a lot of prior to peers that there is, and still today, that there is an inequity between the people who are providing those services and people who are accessing those services that are based on identity and experience. So really acknowledging that people that are speaking the same language, from poverty to middle class, is a totally different language. And peers have that ability to be able to translate, from people who are navigating systems to people who are working within systems. So starting with this, that we acknowledge that, the peers are important. This next really, this next part is about acknowledging the disparities that peers are needed because of the disparities. Peers have experienced a lot of the disparities between navigating the systems, and that means that that the best people to work with others who have experienced disparities, but we continue to experience those disparities within the workplace. And we'll be looking at this much deeper within the training, looking at all of the different ways that peers consciously, unconsciously, whether that is through a job description that isn't very clear, or the othering that does happen, because of the differences in education and certification, but that leads people to feeling dismissed or not valued or not heard, and people not understanding, again, the science of trauma, addiction, living with mental health challenges, that it doesn't ever go away. What is often expected is that when people enter the workforce, is that they leave their trauma, their substance use, their mental health issues, their personal lives at the door, and that leads to a lot of compartmentalization. And what we are really hoping to make it this point again and again is that everything that peers need, everybody needs. And we'll look at whether the questions that we're asking, and it looks like we have 72% have participated. So if you're still thinking about those, questions, that is the goal. That you really pay attention to how that feels in your body, and again, as Jess said, thinking about whether you trust us or not. If this is a safe enough environment to disclose some of your own vulnerabilities. Really, the goal of a lot of this is to bring your attention to what feels comfortable and the way that we grow. And I'll let Jess, if you want to explain this slide.
Sure. Yeah, I think this is really rooted in just kind of our ability to sit in discomfort. That's how I kind of think about it for myself. If I'm going to move into a growth zone and really change some of the deeply rooted thoughts and beliefs that I've held for a really long time, I'm going to have to move out of a comfort zone in order to do that. And I know for me, a lot of times that creates fear first. And there's times where I feel like I've done it wrong, or it's been the things that I've done are like, there's shame there oftentimes, if I'm being honest, right? So I think that this work can kind of feel like that a little bit as we're moving out of our comfort zones. Like you might experience fear or frustration or discomfort in that. And I know for me, that always makes me think, I think I'm learning something here. I think I'm moving into a growth zone. So I could think about even all the things that I had beliefs about or perspectives on even 5 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe even last year, if I'm being really honest, that I completely and totally disagree with now. So part of what we're really asking you to do here today is to think about this maybe in a different way than you have before, and kind of be willing to move into that growth zone, out of the comfort zone, sort of that zone that can feel sometimes like this is how things have always been done in our organization, the stuck spots a little bit, and move into an area of growth. So Christina is going to talk to us a little bit about how to catch and reflect on those thoughts and beliefs that we might have.
Yeah, a really good example of this growth zone process is the deinstitutionalization of mental health. So moving away, we can all agree now that housing people with mental health challenges within institutions and the horrific things that happened to them there was in everyone's best interest to discontinue that. But when we look at the history of what happened there, we saw that people were comfortable with the way that they had been doing things for a long time, and they were really afraid. There was a lot of narratives around fear, a lot of myth, a lot of stigma about people who are struggling, and what needed to happen was a whole growth period of education, lots and lots of advocacy work, so that we could get to a place of meaningful, significant change. And we're in the process of doing this for several other movements. But when we look at the process, that means that we do have to move from our comfort and be willing to be uncomfortable so we can start the education process. The quote that we chose that really fits this super well is that the first thought that we have that goes through our mind really really comes from our conditioning. So, and that's not your responsibility. So it's important for us to think again, to learn to think again. So how do you catch those thoughts that you have? How do you examine the core beliefs that you have about different things? And a way to do that is really to ask yourself a couple of questions. Where did I learn this? Who is harmed by this? Who benefits from this? And so this is something that we're going to continually be practicing again and again as we are examining the different modalities of program are connected to ideology and are connected to language. And so we're gonna continually bring that reflection to you. One of the quotes that we've chosen, this really could be a quote for the entire training, and there's a lot of grace in this. And really what this quote brings us to the heart of it is that the more that you allow yourself to be human, the more permission you give it to other people. That you can't, even if you learn from the process, if you share that with other people, then they're not mistakes. And this is really normalizing the way that we grow without shame, without guilt, without stigma. That we need room to be human. And this is from Maya Angelou, and that is the quote is that we do the best that we can until we know better, and then when we know better, we do better. And this is really for everything. This is how we learn, this is how we grow, and that we understand that we can't give people something that we don't have. And whether that is patience, compassion, kindness, that it always starts with help with ourselves. Let's see here. So we have a couple of these questions. And so let's see here, we're at 85% have participated in the poll. And so you've got just a little bit more time, and then we're going to be closing the poll, and we'll be going over those numbers with you. Again, it is anonymous. I can see how many people participated, but it doesn't tell me who's answering what question or how they're answering. And so some of the most important questions that we can ask as a staff, as supervisors, first we have to ask ourselves, like we cannot give people something we don't have. So we're here to create workplaces that fill these gaps so that supervision can be provided in a way that people welcome their full selves. And so these questions really are, again, about that reflective process. Jess, I'll let you ask the questions.
Sure. So if you take a minute to reflect, right? If we're thinking about why is it important to feel seen and understood all the time, right? All the time, but especially in the workplace. Some questions to ask that might help you kind of tap into that are, what do you need to be your full self at work? Meaning, what do staff and supervisors need to know about you for you to feel valued, heard, and understood? Right, so the better we can answer these questions for ourselves, the more well-versed we really are to allow other people to answer and to be curious about what these questions of the staff that are being supervised might be, or the answers might be, right? So this really starts with self-advocacy and kind of our ability to navigate our own needs and self-awareness so that we can give people the opportunity to do this as well. So our ability to do this extends out into our relationships with those that we supervise, right? So just kind of acknowledge what comes to your mind on this.
Yeah, Cami says non-judgmental communication is needed in order to feel comfortable sharing of self. Thank you, Cami. And this is really about relationships. All of this healing-centered practices is how we are in relationship with ourselves, with one another, not just in the workplace, but as a whole, you know, and really a lot of these practices benefit us in every area of our life. So real relationships that are rooted in trust, that feel equal, relationships where we feel celebrated, not just tolerated, where we are heard, where we're acknowledged, we're validated, that we have space and flexibility to make mistakes. I heard there was somebody put something in there about curiosity and invitation to share perspective and gratitude when our perspective feels counter to the conversation. Celebrating diversity, flexibility around neurodiversity and work structures, and celebration that all brains are different. Education, understanding of trauma and varying abilities. And so this is what we'll continue to highlight. In the 2-day training, we're going to look at, you know, what are some of the logistics behind these things that people are asking for. Okay, so if you haven't finished, it looks like we have 89% have participated. So we're going to go ahead and close the polls. The goal of the poll is to validate and normalize people's experiences and break down the us and them. Is there a way to show people the poll results, or do we just have to read it aloud? I'm not sure.
It should be showing right now.
Oh, can everybody can see it? Everybody can see the numbers. Oh, that's great. Okay, great. Then you can see when we look at this, we can see that people are struggling across the board. So have you experienced increased mental health concerns in the last year? And 67% said yes, 33% said no. Have you experienced increase? Oh, I think I need to pull these up, the questions. There it is. Increased substance use concerns in the last year. 11% said yes and 89% said no. Let's look at some more. Are you comfortable seeking help from your employer? 61% said yes and 39% said no. And are you comfortable accepting help from your employer? 68% said yes and 32% said no. Let's see how you did nationally.
When we look at kind of where we stand in comparison to the national data, the COVID-19 pandemic has obviously led to increased mental health and substance use concerns in our organizations, with over half of people reporting increased mental health concerns and nearly 40% reporting substance use concerns. And what's really interesting about this data too is that it's hitting younger generations tougher. We could go into some theory about why that might be. We'd be curious to hear if anybody has thoughts about that in the chat. But what we're seeing is increases from numbers that were already high, and we appreciate everybody who shared where they were at in the poll. But we know that we're seeing less job security, less housing stability, more debt, lower wages than in previous generations. And this is happening within the systems that are designed to support others. So yes, we're talking about the supervision of peers here today, but the majority of us identify as having adverse experiences, and this is really reflected in the data. And on the next slide here, we'll see how we compare with what it feels like to ask for help. So 68% of people nationally said, this is data from 2020, we could put the link in the chat here in a second maybe. So 68%, nearly 70% of workers said they would not be comfortable seeking help from their employer. Nearly 60% said they would not be comfortable accepting that help from their employer if it was offered. I think luckily those here today, those percentages were a little lower, which is nice to see, but it's really common for us to have reservations about coming forth to our employer to say, I need help, and this is what I need help with. In this same survey of over 2,000 people, it was found that most people feared things like losing their job, having coworkers find out, being treated differently by others. And it also found that employees who work and interact with sensitive populations, so folks in healthcare or education, everybody here in this room today was most worried about losing their job if their employer found out about their substance use concern. Right. So if we think about the concerns that we have in our own lives and think about whether or not we would be comfortable asking our employer for help with those things, we can imagine what that experience might be like for those that we are supervising. So Christina will talk a little bit more about the barriers.
And I want to bring your attention to this super cute bear and the pun that we have there. We feel pretty proud of that. And also your attention to the chat. There's really, really great chat happening, and that really highlights, the need for these conversations. Thank you, Lynn. Yeah, let's see here. So what I wanted to look at was I was a clinical supervisor. Oops, let's see here, Gary. So let me try to bring that chat back. It just keeps disappearing. And someone had said that they're more comfortable in seeking help from each other. However, from the clinical level, the administrative level, the want to seek help decreases significantly. Yes, That is something that we have starred, and sometimes we'll talk about the man box, that is associated with misogyny and sexism, and how difficult it is for men to be able to open up about their feelings, and what that looks like, within the workplace as well as the recovery community. The other thing that's really important to look at is the leadership box. Like and I can't see your name to give you, I want to give you that credit for that quote, Ashley Johnson. Thank you so much for bringing that to the attention. That yes, that the more responsibility and in the hierarchy of the workplace, the higher up that people are, the less likely they are to ask for help, and the more shame and stigma. Here within Alaska, there was a really renowned medical provider who had relapsed. It was very open, who was fired and no longer can work in the field, even though this was somebody that was providing those kind of services. We've had several different panels from mental health providers who have said that they cannot access mental health for themselves. Otherwise, they fear that they would lose their job. And the same goes for substance use clinicians. Even though peers are very open about it, we found that the dynamic on the other side, who are often their supervisors, it is not the same. Or for peers who are experiencing substance use and mental health challenges, who are open about it, there can be that double stigma that we often don't want to hurt. For example, this presentation, if I were to say, I can't show up because I am having a mental health crisis, I would fear that it would hurt the movement, that people would be like, oh, this is just peers not being able to show up, and would lead to that stigma that we're trying to break down. So here we want to think about, what are those barriers? Why is it hard for us to ask for help and to receive help? And when we start with self, when it starts with self, there's a lot of science and about the information. When you can connect it back to you, you're more likely to retain it, you're more likely to use it, and you're more likely to understand what the implications for other people are. So just for yourself, thinking about something in your life that might be embarrassing. So even if we're not talking about substance use and mental health, we want you to be able to connect it to the reality of that, something that that you have guilt about, something that you might be in denial about. And think about denial more as a protective factor, a very, very important protective factor that helps us, that you would not be comfortable sharing with other people, and then asking for help about that. And then what are the collateral consequences of that? That if providers themselves can't ask for help, then how does that transcend to peers coming in the workplace as well as to the community? And this really leads us to something that we are super excited about, which are the solutions.
Da, da, da. Yes. So we're going to talk briefly about some solutions to all of this that we've been discussing so far, but do want to just send a shout out that this is most definitely an overview. This is a bird's eye view, and the 2-day training is going to go much deeper into the solutions. And so we'll begin with a reminder and a beautiful quote from Christina Love. We can't give people what we don't have, and we can only take people as far as we have gone ourselves. So this work has to begin with ourselves and start with each of us. Everything that we do, everything that we're talking about can happen with fluidity once we've come to these answers and had this understanding from ourselves, right? So if we want to provide supportive supervision, we have to start with what's happening inside of us. So this then grows out to the way that we provide supervision to our coworkers and the atmosphere that we're creating in our organizations. Staff meetings is a really good place to kind of survey, how is it feeling to be here, to work here? How could I imagine what it feels like to receive services here based on the way that the people who are receiving services here are discussed within a staff meeting? And that really directly impacts peer staff, all staff really, and our ability to ask for help or show up when we need help. I know for myself, the way that people are being discussed in a staff meeting is gonna determine how comfortable I feel showing up in my truth. So we would go deeply into language and the ways that that people are discussed if we had a little bit more time, but it's a really good, kind of litmus test to think about what is the organizational culture that we're creating here, because this directly impacts the way supervision is provided. And of course, the ultimate impact is how services are provided to the communities that we're working to support. So Christina will talk to us a little bit more about the healing-centered solutions that we're going to do an overview of.
Yeah, no, gosh, and there's such great chat. If we had more time, I hope that we decided to not put a cap on the registration for the 2-day training. So we want to be, the training is about equity. So we want to be as equitable as possible and making sure that anybody who wants access to it has it. And it's, Jess and I are the host of that training. We're not facilitators. And what the difference is that we're part of it. And so we hope to create this learning community to be able to talk about these things and really reflect and create dialogue and space, as well as get to the meat and mushrooms, we call it. And for our vegan vegetarians, the sustenance of the training is this, that can be summed up here in healing-centered engagement. This is healing-centered practices. I want to take a moment to explain the slides here and this slide here. So at the bottom here is our culture and identity. At the base, everything that we do comes from our culture and identity. You can have no higher thought than how you think about yourself and how that translates to the people that you work with. And at the bottom here, we have our values, our principles. And when our values and our principles are nurtured, when they are grown, what comes from that are these healing-centered practices. And so we've got things like diversity, accessibility, cultural responsiveness, strength-based, trauma-informed, liberation, empowerment, anti-oppression, inclusion, equity. And so when we know that DEI, a lot of people will focus on that, but this is, and that is, and those are important parts. And so is trauma-informed is incredibly important. During the 2-day training, we will look at the difference between trauma-informed and healing-centered practices. And so one of them really being is that trauma-informed comes from a clinical place, and healing-centered practices more social justice and more holistic. And so like the very beginning, we gave the land acknowledgement that was a healing center practice. So that means that we acknowledge the trauma, but we also acknowledge the ways that people survive that trauma and their full identity. And that's what we want people to focus on. We want you to be aware of all the ways that we've been harmed and to know that we are more than the harm that has happened to us. And another part of that is that people who have been directly impacted are at the center and at the front of not just looking at the ways that people have been harmed, but addressing the root causes of those harm. And so a way that translates. And so when we're thinking about how does trauma informed show up in the workplace, it is connected to all of these things. If it's not culturally responsive, it's not strength-based, then it's not trauma informed. If it's not anti-oppression, if it's not inclusive, if it's not equitable, it's not trauma informed. Strength-based is another one that to do that requires these principles. Strength-based is the indigenous practice of that would be sovereignty. And what that means is that we believe that every person has the ability to overcome anything that is in front of them. And if for example, if you are confronted with a participant, a client, whatever language you're using for engaging with the community, if you are interfacing with somebody who you believe doesn't have the ability to recover, that is your own work. And again, it goes back to, if you yourself don't believe that you have the ability to overcome whatever is in front of you, then you won't be able to give that to other people. And just the practice of strength-based requires a lot of these principles. Another way that, some of the things that we'll touch on in the training and looking at, trauma-informed is the science of addiction. How trauma-informed shows up in the workplaces. Don't call me into your office because it's going to elicit an emotional and physical response from me. If you send me an email on a Friday and tell me you want to talk to me on a Monday, that's going to elicit an emotional and physical response from me that I don't have control over. We will bring attention to the power imbalances that come with supervision and really look at some of the practices that keep supervisory practices and keeping that relationship intact and the role, and really eliminating that us and them. Joshua said it really wonderful that it isn't really a safe place for supervisors to ask for help or to be vulnerable. And that's some of the things that we want to break down and invite some other practices and principles into the workplace. So these next couple of slides really look at what those healing-centered practices look like for the logistic. And so what that means is ongoing support, and that is reflective, strength-based. We can pull a lot of principles from recovery. I think the thing that I really want to highlight here is this third bullet point is really, this talks about, I heard one of the quotes was up that somebody had put in the chat box was that 75% of the workforce in substance use and mental health are people who have lived experience. But what we'll be talking about is all of the different pathways to recovery. Oftentimes we hear the single story of recovery that comes from the medical model, like I went through hardship and then I went to treatment and now I never use drugs and alcohol again. And that actually isn't reflective of the majority of people. So we'll be looking at all the different ways that people access healing and health for mental health, for substance use, and we'll be using language that's reflective of all of the different pathways, including harm reduction. And I think that that is really the one that we're really going to focus on. So a harm reduction approach for the workplace is really focusing on the way that people show up and their ability to do the work, rather on substance use, and not having any of our own agenda or idea of what that recovery looks like for people. So that's just one example. Another thing that we are really going to be focusing on is the policies and practice for the entire workplace that is supportive of people. So relationships that are transformative, not transactional. We know that HR and a lot of policy work is really intended to protect organizations, but we know that there is that middle spot for policies that are supportive of staff. And so I'll give you a couple of examples, is that policies that for domestic violence, policies for sexual assault, and how that connects to when we look at how many people, how many women, LGBTQ, how there's an increase in violence for that community based on marginalization, for the Native community based on being targeted, and understanding the relationship that trauma has to substance use and mental health, and then what that looks like in the workplace, and how we can be supportive of all of the different experiences that people have, and some of the things that we can do to really accommodate those needs is by changing the schedule. So we'll give lots of different options that are based off of that you can do with funding and without funding. We can get really creative in the ways that we support people. A way that we can give people power, if you don't have the ability to give them a raise, is to give them a title change, something that does give them a different sense of identity about the work that they're doing, and working with people to create that change. But for substance use and mental health needs, these are some of the most commonly requested accommodations that are around changing their schedule, giving them time off, fewer job duties. On here we have rehab listed for substance use needs, but really it's just time off to engage in any of the pathways that they are deciding for themselves. And working with people to give them that language so that they can be protective of their own anonymity, and really empowering people. There's a lot of evidence that shows that when we have these supportive practices, when we invest in people, then staff retention increases dramatically. That when people feel a part of, when they feel seen, when they feel celebrated, then we want to be here. We want to show up. We want to participate. And there's also a lot of research that shows that giving people time off increases productivity, that people can't pour from an empty well, that we have to give them the space. And we're not just talking about, the fluffs type of self-care where you give somebody a bath bomb, like a real time and resources to take care of themselves in a way that is truly transformative. Or another quote that people say is really to give them a life that they don't want to escape, give them the ability to build a life that is meaningful for them and purpose. And this is another really incredible, we want to make sure that we have time for questions, that we're answering those questions, but this is something that we'll be focusing on, and this is liberation-centered workplaces. We can put this wonderful resource in the chat. These are some of the resources that we'll be looking at during the 2-day training. And if you see, looking back from the other slide, we had the forest, just zooming in on one of those trees, we have the effects of stigma and how that comes from these different core beliefs. And from those core beliefs, we see, the impact of that. And on the other side, this is really what we'd be focusing a lot of our time on is these liberation practices. So the core belief was that we assume positively, that we are investing in community, that we are dedicated to authentic, meaningful relationships that are rooted in trust. And then what comes from that is that we create plans together based on their goals, that we get curious, that we ask questions, that we share resources. And we'll be looking at, you know, some of the other practices. When we talk about transparency in the workplace, we don't mean that if you ask me, I will tell you. That means that resources, that information is readily available, that people are aware of what's happening, that they are part of that process, they're part of that change process, because we know that people own what they create. So really looking at how hierarchy and some of the challenges of the design of our workplaces, and giving some alternative options. This quote again brings us back to really the heart of the matter, that we have to reimagine revolution and think not only about the change in our institutions, but the change in ourselves, and really see the fluidity there, that if we want to impact our community, that it starts with self again and flows out to our organization and then to the community. So we thank you so much for joining us. We're going to take some time for questions. We will also stay on after. The recording is going to end right at the top of the hour, but we'll stay on afterwards to be able to answer questions. And then after the recording's off, we have one more song. If you didn't get to play in the beginning, we're going to do give one more opportunity for you to win a prize. But we'll go ahead and open it up to questions about anything and everything.
Christina, maybe while people are taking some time to type out those questions in the chat box, I can kind of go over some closing remarks as well. Thank you so much, Christina and Jess, for the presentation. As mentioned, we will send a link to the training that they'll be providing on July 26th and 27th. So that'll come in the email that we're sending out later today. We'll also be sending out that survey. It's provided in the chat box as well. So please be sure that you complete that survey. We'll also be putting on a webinar on June 30th with our partners at the Clinical Trials Network, and that webinar is going to be titled Emergency Department Initiated Buprenorphine for Opioid Use Disorder. So be on the lookout on our website for the registration for that webinar. And it looks like maybe some questions are starting to come in, so I'll turn it back over to you guys.
And Kathleen, I did see your question earlier regarding the healing centered practices image, and whether or not there'd be a reading list or kind of a citation list. We are working on a list of resources, and you'll have the slides available to you as well. But we could see if maybe we could send that out with or attach it with the slides too.
Yeah, and Kathleen, it's something that we have reimagined together. So my team here at the Alaska Network created it. I drew it out on paper about 2 years ago. One of my staff people helped build that. Every time that we're in community, it grows a little bit. So for instance, a conversation that I had with Gabriela Zapata-Alma from the National Center on the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health, had given the vision for the principles in the bottom for it to grow out. But it really grew out of a need that diversity, equity, inclusion is really, really wonderful. But what felt like it was missing was trauma-informed, culturally responsive accessibility. And then some of the other principles and practices like empowerment, like strength-based and sovereignty that really are a really important part of that, as well as the distinction between trauma-informed and healing-centered practices. So when I'm working with people, I want them to focus on the best parts of me. Specifically, when I think about for the Indigenous community, myself, that only knowing that we had survived, and people only seeing the struggle that we have, and how that leads to confirmation bias and a lot of myths and narrative about the Indigenous community. So really wanting to work to to tell the whole truth about the violence that we've survived, the way that we've survived it, and who we are as people prior to that, during that, and right now. You know, what it means to be an Alaska Native person in the year 2022, and having people focus on my own strengths, and that really coming from navigating the systems that where people are focusing on that, and that feeling like a really uncomfortable identity for myself, like having people only to see the trauma. Yeah, so if that explains it, and we'll be talking about that in greater length. Are we seeing some more? I want to make sure I get to everybody's questions for people who have to leave at the top of the hour. Thanks, Raymond. Thank you. Thank you. Really wonderful audience. So much appreciation for the chat. I really hope that we see you and we get to spend more time with all of you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, really, really wonderful community. So much that we can learn from your experiences. We hope that you do join us. Let's see here. Are you guys, I want to make sure I didn't miss any questions. Are you guys seeing other questions?
I didn't see any other questions come in other than that one specifically.
Yeah, I know that. And being able to talk about the differences, I saw a comment in there that somebody had said, like, as a staff who identifies as an older person, then they are expected to be more stable. I think that, you know, and that is ageism, and we'll talk about, you know, the different isms and how that comes into the workplace. So many. Okay, let's see if I can catch up with this. Yeah, so James says it would be great to include access to the chat transcript. I think that is definitely something that we can do. Is that right, Jennifer or Meg?
Yep, this is Meg. I can definitely send that as an attachment with the email that comes out today. It's not formatted beautifully by Zoom, but I'll see if I can make it a little easier to read before I send it out. But sure, I will definitely do that. Thank
you. And that was Meg, right?
Yep.
Thank you, Meg. And Meg created the beautiful flyer for us for the training. So thank you so much to ATTC, to Jennifer, to Meg, to their whole team. Really, really wonderful, very supportive team. It's felt good to be able to say that everything that we're presenting to you is also happening in real time. Yeah, wonderful. I'm surprised that you don't have more questions, but I do appreciate it. Okay, so for everybody, we're going to do one more. We're going to do one more game, and then we're going to stop the recording. We're going to stick around. I think we can unmute you to have a really candid conversation that is not recorded. So if we don't have any, if there's no other questions that are in for the panelists, is that right, Jennifer and Meg? We can go ahead and boogie over to our last game. Okay, I see Leonard has hand raised. Yeah, is there a way to unmute Leonard?
Hold on, I'm having trouble seeing. Is it Leonard Mayo? Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, thanks, Leonard.
It just jumped. So, and I allowed someone else to talk. Hold on one second. Let me see if I can just search for you, Leonard. Sorry about the wait here. Okay. It says I can't because Leonard is using an older version of Zoom. Can you put your question in the chat, Leonard?
I just tried to make him a panelist.
Yeah, I don't think we want to do that.
Oh, yeah, I already did. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Leonard. But can you unmute yourself now? Let's see.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was just wondering about, I know you said this was a 2-day training, and I didn't get that type of business. I just thought it was just the webinar today, but what is a 2-day training and what is that?
Thanks. Yeah, it feels like we paid you to say that. Yeah, so we'll put the dates and the registration in there. So this is the introduction to that. Jess and I spent a really long time trying to distill down all of our materials into this hour long to give you an example of what we'd be talking about. So during the 2-day training, it'll be a lot of those reflective questions to bring out, some of the different ideas that we hold ourselves about who we are and the people that we work with. We'll be asking you a lot of questions about what you need in the workplace to feel supported, to feel like your best self. We'll be going over how to make safety plans essentially for yourself and with other people. A lot of self-advocacy so that you're able to navigate your own needs and ask for that. And because we believe that when you have your own needs met, when you feel that you are empowered and have the ability to navigate that, and that's really from the principle that everything that peers need, we all need. And then by even saying like that we're going to do a training on peer supervision kind of creates the us and then them dynamic. From like the statistics that we showed, as well as the own poll, I mean, whether you identify as a peer or not, just from the statistics alone, what we know is that the majority of people struggle with mental health, with substance use, with trauma, with neurodiversity, that there are a lot of different differences that we have that aren't reflective as supportive within the workplace, and how that transcends to peers and also to the community. So so this presentation was really about making that case. And then during the 2-day, we're going to dive deeper into that one slide that showed the healing centered practices. So we'll be talking about cultural responsiveness, why that is important, and what that looks like on an individual basis as well as an organizational basis. We'll be talking about trauma informed, the science of trauma, and how that shows up in the workplace, and what we need to know to work with our staff as well as the community, and everything in between. So we're still a little bit out. It would be important and valuable for everybody who's still here to let us know, what it is that you would love to see in that. Like we still have time for you to get to be a part of that creation and have voice and what feels important. I hope that answers everything, Leonard.
Yeah, it does. I was just wondering, so it is a little ways out, so I'll just be waiting for the email. Okay.
Yeah, it'll be coming right after this. You can
Okay.
you can look for it shortly after we close down the training. Thank
Okay.
you, Leonard.